right, now let's do some fan questions.
Gaethje, a big fan from Ireland here. Wondering if I could get your take on Justin Gaethje and Khabib Nurmagomedov. If that fight was to happen, do you think that Gaethje could keep it standing, and do you think he has a good chance of winning that fight? Like I personally do. Thanks.
I hear you on that in the kickboxing realm. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I think that if Conor has his way, that's exactly how it's done. And old Cowboy, that's how we would know it was going to be done. It was Cowboy versus Patrick Cote is the first time Cowboy Cerrone all of a sudden breaks out this masterful double leg. He then takes that into his Rick Story fight. All of a sudden, he's taking Rick Story, a national finalist in college wrestling. 2 or 3 times he got him down. Cowboy took down Tony Ferguson. Cowboy Cerrone now all of a sudden has this double leg. So I do think that you're right, that it would be billed as a kickboxing match. I will just remind you, Cowboy's a tricky son of a gun, and he might, if he wants to, all of a sudden surprise Conor and take it to the floor.
What's up, Chael? Love the show, man. Hey, do you think hitting an opponent, beating the hell out of them after they're clearly knocked out, should be considered like submissions being held on too long? Some people have been kicked out of the UFC for that. I think people are smart enough to know when people are knocked out. What do you think?
Okay, couple things on that. You would be surprised where people don't know. They don't know the guy's out. I've actually seen a couple of fights where the guy's done, at least appearance-wise, and the opponent backs. I've seen opponents on top, ground, and he stops and gets up and turns to celebrate, and the other guy comes to life, and the referee goes, hey, I never stopped this fight. It's one of those tricky ones, because if I give you the answer that he shouldn't do that, the adverse to that is you should keep pounding a guy who's out. Well, that's a scumbag move. No, I don't advocate for that in the least. But it isn't quite the same as your talk about submissions. You said people have been kicked out of the UFC for holding on to submissions too long. Now, I believe that's happened to 2 guys. One was Babalu, and the other was Palhares. This was a little bit different. Now, Babalu had held a submission and openly said, yes, I was mad at the guy, and he said stuff before, and I held the submission on purpose. There's not a lot you can do there. There's just not a lot you could do. You have to go and visit that and discipline him. As it comes to Palhares, he had done it 4 times. 4 times he held a submission. And please allow me to explain the difference. It's not a matter of the guy going out or even the guy tapping and you keeping it. You won't be judged for that, at least not by the organization or by a sanctioning body, meaning a commission. It's when the referee comes in, physically touches you, and says the word stop, and you don't. That's where the problem comes. The same would come with the ground and pound. And as much as you may think a guy knows another guy's, let's say he even does know the guy's out, and he just wants to be a jerk. He's just got character issues within the rules. He can do that until the referee steps in and says stop. And there is something also to the component of the referee physically touching you. Physically touching you. Not the horn. You will be instructed of that very thing in the back by the referee. He will come into your locker room. He will tell you how he's going to call the fight. Now, all he can do is call it within the unified rules, but each referee will have a couple of things where they can help you. Give you an example. If you guys are on the ground, there's not a lot of action happening. A referee will have some kind of a signal to you. He generally will not just step in and go, okay, surprise, back to your feet. The referee will say, get busy. I need to see some activity. And these are some of the things that he'll tell you. This is how I'm going to do this. I'm going to give you a warning. I will give you up to 2. I will not give you 3. On the 3rd, if I do not see an advancement of position or an attempt to create damage and finish a fight, I am going to break it and bring it up to their feet. So the referee tips you off, but in that meeting, one of the things that he will tell you is you don't go off of the horn, you go off of me. So that actually came, just to give you a quick history, 1992 Barcelona Olympics. They were boxing. 3 rings are set up at a time. Don't forget the boxing isn't like you see in the pros where they fight 2 or 3 times a year. It's a tournament. You got to fight 4 guys if you're going to win the gold medal. 3 guys just to get to the gold medal match. Point is, because it's a tournament, they got to have 3 rings, and they're going simultaneously all at the same time. They have to. They got to run 56 fights in 2 days. Guy that's supposed to win the gold medal. Defending world champion, number 1 seed. He's dominated the fight. Very first round, he's dominating the fight. A whistle goes off on a different fight that's going simultaneously. Boxer stops, drops his hands, gets ready to turn to his corner. Boom. Takes a right hook. He's out cold. That is where it all, protect yourself at all times. That's where that came from. That is where you do not stop on the whistle. You do not stop on the horn. The horn signals me. I signal you. I only offer you that because that is very vicious when you're talking about hitting somebody who's clearly out. That's a very dirty thing. You need to stop when the referee says stop, and you do not need to stop until he says stop.
Splash of almond milk for Nate Diaz. Great. Thank you very much. Oh, hey! Uncle Chael, the American gangster, responding to my video. Okay, great. Chael, I got a question for you, all right? I was talking to a buddy of mine about Conor's return on the 18th. Right now, we know Conor's going to fight 2 people, right? It's either going to be Cowboy Jabroni. It's looking like it's going to be him. Dana said, we don't know yet. But it's also maybe Justin Gaethje, right? Now, talking primarily about Justin Gaethje, let's say I'm right, okay? Let's say it is Justin Gaethje. The buddy of mine says, no, it's not even going to be a contest for Conor. Conor's going to wreck through Gaethje because the 2 losses that Gaethje has are 2 people that Conor beat. Oh, and by the way, that Conor ran through. I don't know if I'm sold on it, and I'll tell you why. Because the Eddie fight between Gaethje, now that was a war. Okay, that was fight of the year. That was Yair Jeremy kind of fight of the year. All right, but the Dustin Poirier thing. You know, let the record be shown that the Dustin Poirier that Justin Gaethje faced is wildly different than the one Conor faced, you know? So I don't know if it's that easy. So what do you think, Chael? That's my question. That's mainly, I am asking you to tell me what you think would happen.
Okay, well, that's an interesting way that you laid it out. I had not realized until you just said it that Justin's 2 losses were to 2 guys that Conor beat. You're talking about Eddie Alvarez. And you're talking about Justin Poirier. That's interesting. I know that MMA math doesn't work, but that's still a talking point, and I hadn't considered, so well done by you. I do think that you're right in your assessment that Cowboy is in the driver's seat, right? I mean, don't forget, Gaethje's coming off a win, Cowboy's coming off a loss, Conor is coming off a loss. Generally, a guy with a loss and a loss matchup. Look, that's everything I just said does not apply to Conor McGregor. But when you can bring in some history and some rules of the sport, and you can bring in a guy like Conor McGregor, I like that. It also does come down to matchups. Donald Cerrone is going to go kickboxer. Kickboxer at heart, kickboxer by training, kickboxer base, kickboxer first. Going out with a great striker in Conor McGregor. I think it's a really interesting match. Now, I love both of them. I do think that's a really interesting match. I also think you've got many angles to go with it. I mean, look, Coors Light is already starting to weigh in against Proper 12. And while that may sound like something silly to you, that's very real. A lot of people know what Proper 12 is, and a hell of a lot more know what Coors Light. I mean, that if you could get companies like that behind it, it matters. Those are intangibles outside the box, but it matters, and I think you have to listen to it. It does appear to me also, Conor and Cowboy were told they were going to fight and agreed to fight. Cowboy flew to Australia to make the announcement of that fight, had the rug ripped out from under him, and has done 2 fights since. I don't love the word deserve, but there is an opportunity there to fight Conor. That is an opportunity. And it is almost a deserve factor. And Cowboy does deserve. Does that mean Justin doesn't? Paul Felder's even thrown his hat in the ring. Does that mean Paul Felder doesn't deserve? No. These are all great fights, but I am with you, and I do think that right now it is leaning appropriately towards Cowboy.
Hey, Chael. So in your last video, you mentioned that Ben Askren's involved in a lot of other things than fighting. He's involved in crypto and coaching and wrestling. Now, I want to know, when you're fighting at the highest level, when you want to be the best and possibly the champion, how many other things can you have going on in your life without being distracted from that goal? To be the best fighter in the world, I would think that you'd have to solely be focused on that goal. Tell me what you think.
Well, I would tell you this. I think it comes down to, can you be at practice twice a day, every day, like your coach would like you to? Do you going to have any excuse to have to show up late or leave early? If you can be there and on the mat on time and you don't have to leave until the coach says you're done, go hit the shower, and you can do that twice a day, every day, whatever you do in between is fair game. If that's a business venture, great. If that's a hobby, great. If that's go home and rest and play video games, which disgusts me when I'm here, but if that's what you do, fine. I will remind you, Stipe Miocic is a fireman. I will remind you, Daniel Cormier is a coach, head coach of a high school. I mean, guys have other things. That's before you talk about Stipe and Family Guy and, Parenthood and husband and all this, and apply those same things to Daniel. And you also mentioned their commentator, as you guys see, but they go to practice and they have ways to do it. Stipe works his schedule. He gets his workouts in. Daniel Cormier, when he's on the road doing commentary, brings his coach with him. They get workouts right there at the hotel. They get him in the room, but he never skips. So there's ways to do it. And I know that the ultimate default is to just tell a guy, don't do anything else and put your sole focus on that. That's one way to do it. But if a guy has some discipline and he's got some energy and he's not one of these guys that has to sleep 8 and 10 hours a night, he's just awake and just has a high energy, let him have his other activities.
Do you think that, like Askren, Khabib, when he fights Tony, faces the same dilemma, which is that taking his opponent down actually might be where he's the most vulnerable and playing into Tony's hands because of Tony's jiu-jitsu? Or do you think that both guys will fancy their chances in the stand-up? I think it's fair to say Tony's got the better striking, but Khabib's never been dropped, and Tony's been dropped numerous times in his career. Or is it going to be business as usual, Khabib taking Tony down, making him tired, if that's even possible, breaking in Tony's will, if that's even possible, and ultimately making Tony quit?
My assessment isn't totally different than yours, and you laid out like 4 or 5 different possibilities that fight could have. You were not very specific. I couldn't be either. There's a few places that could go. Make believing that you can just go throw Tony Ferguson down anytime you want for 25 minutes, man, that's a stretch for me. That's a big stretch, and nobody else has ever been able to do that or even come close to doing that. The argument that Tony is so much better off his back that he could submit Khabib, that's a bit of a stretch for me as well. I don't see Tony quite as this submission genius that many people do. I see Tony as a guy who will threaten submissions nonstop and then pound you from the bottom. That's what I see as most intimidating about Tony from his groundwork. Even if you go watch the first time he won a championship versus Kevin Lee, he was locking things up, but he was giving these Tony Ferguson, he was doing so much damage. He was so active and so busy from the bottom. He has a way of fighting from the bottom. And I know the jiu-jitsu community is happy to cling to Tony and say, he's just doing jiu-jitsu and he's one of our own. And Tony is more than happy to tip his hat and give it right back to jiu-jitsu. But that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a vicious dog fighting from his back, not just looking for submissions. So I do think that you have a very interesting fight there. And Khabib does have trouble taking people down. This masterful wrestler that Khabib is, and this narrative that goes around, is very true if you also add against the fence. If you can keep your back off of the fence against Khabib, your likelihood of staying on your feet goes up almost 90%. Statistically speaking, Khabib is pushing guys in and then he's going to work. It's amazing. He's incredible at it. But it is one of these things where you do start to wonder, well, not only have I not seen Tony just taken down at will before, I've never seen Tony held against a fence before. Maybe Tony is the guy. Maybe he's not. That's why they got to do the fight. But as far as us building a narrative ahead of time and doing a little of what you did, which go, well, I can see it going like this or I can see it going like that. We're within our right to do that. That's going to be a wild fight, and each guy can cross each other out in a couple of areas.
Hey, Chael, Sam from Ohio here. I was wondering if Max Holloway goes back to lightweight, do you think we should prepare to see a Max with a little bit more muscle mass? A lot of people criticized him being too small, and he's talked about going back eventually. I feel like he could have the success Dustin has had if he puts on a little bit more mass and tries to grow into the weight class, but I feel like he didn't really get a fair shake in the last run we saw. Let me know what you think.
Well, I got no problem with that assessment. I mean, look, there is something very real about a guy has to dip his toe in a water right? A guy has to stay in a weight class for just a little bit of time. I mean, I'll see your example of that being Max's first time at the weight and having a super hard fight. I'll see that example, and I'll raise you another question I have, which is Jacare. In theory, I like in build and size and stature Jacare at 205 pounds, but we were just shown by Chris Weidman's debut that it can take a little bit of time, that those are different bodies. You look at Jacare's coming up fight with Jean. That's a big guy. And by the way, Jan hits really, really hard. And he's a big, true light heavyweight. So is it going to take Jacare a little bit of time? I mean, I'm interested in that question, but I think the answer to that question also supports your thesis.
Hey, Chael, big fan. My question to you was, in light of Dominic Reyes making all these waves recently, why are people forgetting about Thiago Santos as if he didn't put on a hell of a performance on basically one leg?
Okay, so really is the answer to that, and it's not out of disrespect to Thiago Santos. Thiago Santos suffered a vicious injury in that. ACL was gone, but I also believe it was an MCL. I believe like everything you could possibly hurt in your knee, he hurt. I know for sure he had ACL. I saw him right after the fight. And by about 90 minutes after the fight. And he was on his way to the hospital. So I know about the ACL, but I believe it was also an MCL. Point being, real simply, he's out for 1 year, and that's just from the practice room, and that's also a best case scenario. That's just from the practice room to get back to training. I do suspect when he's back training, and once he has a fight, and should he look spectacular, as he likely will, we're having a totally different narrative. But he's not being overlooked by disrespect. He's actually on the injured list.
Uncle Chill, there's no bad guy like Uncle Chill. He never lost, not even a round, undefeated, undisputed. Oh yeah, here comes the bad guy, yeah, Uncle Chill.